Take a seat.
So you're saying that
total business spending.
Our relevance is rooted deeply in our institutions, in the way we organize ourselves, as represented in our tripartite relationships. Because tripartism isn't something that happens overnight. It's something that you build over years because it builds on trust. So that clearly is a deep strength for Singapore. Go on.
But, there's more than just tripartism, you see. Because people have actually over the years, whether you like it or not, our investors actually get to be more and more demanding. When they come to Singapore, before, when Singapore and the whole region was fraught with industrial relations problems, labor management problems, such as you will find if you go to England today, but that is already taken for granted already. That is already a given. It's already a given. When I come to Singapore, I expect actually that there will be tripartism. So they will be looking for something else over and above that. And what I think these days they look for is, they look for the strength in the middle value of that, in the middle level of that value chain, The top end actually is your R&D. And your middle level actually is your management, the PMAT focused part of the value chain. And the lower part, of course, is your workers. In fact, I will jump a little bit and tell you about my conversation with Mr. T. Yamashita, or Matsushita. Mr. T. Yamashita, Mr. T. Yamashita, Matsushita and Company made a visit to Singapore. He came at a very critical time, and I had to take him to go and see MM.
Which year was this? Mid-80s? 90s?
Maybe around about 77 or 78.
Okay, late 70s.
77 or 78. And he came at a time, I remember this because he came at a time when EDB was actually writing papers to try and convince the government to actually relax our foreign worker policy, to allow more foreign workers to come in order to actually help us build up a critical mass. So I took Mr. T. Yamashita, who I remember as being the most strategic of the Yamashita CEOs I have met with or dealt with, to see MM. And then, right, because we had our memo right in front of MM, the first question MM asked him was that, Mr. Yamashita, do you have foreign workers in your operations? In Singapore, but worldwide. He said, yes. And said, what trouble, he said. So what trouble I have? So he quoted the example of Germany. Where Matsushita has this operation in Germany, that is filled with Turks and Yugoslavs and all kinds of what in German they call Gastarbeiter and Gastarbeiterin, meaning guest workers. And he had a lot of problems with that. So he told MM that he has a lot of problems with foreign workers in Germany. And I sat there chewing my fingernails, telling myself that, my goodness, we are not going to get the extra foreign workers that we are, writing this report, with. We'll never get the foreign workers. And then on the way back after the meeting, incidentally, we did get the foreign workers, but on the way back after the meeting, Mr. Yamashita said to me, he said, I want to tell you that when we invest in Singapore, it's not just at random. We have a strategic plan and we have a strategic agenda. And our perspective of Singapore, you must understand, because if you don't, we will be asynchronous. We want something and you offering something else. So I say, what is it that you actually look for in Singapore? He says, it's very simple, Mr. Chan. He says, if I want an operation, that is heavily research, engineering, scientist, intensive, I go to America. I will not come to Singapore. And no matter what you do to persuade me, I will not come to Singapore with that. And if I want an operation that is that requires low skilled labor and low cost labor, I will go to China or I will go to Indonesia, but I will not come to Singapore. And then he finished off by saying, well, why would I come to Singapore? He said, I come to Singapore because our studies show, that your average level of capability is very high. And I can always pick things to do in Singapore. As a big, growing global company, I can always pick things to do in Singapore that taps the high average capability. In other words, not the low end, not the high end, but average end.
So it's not just a few people, but it's the total capability, again, of the entire country.
That's right. And then subsequently, I learned that Matsushita is not unique in that, and that this is the way Japanese economists think, or even American economists think about Japan. How they think about Japan, and this has got a bearing on China and all the other places.
But this was back in the 70s, the late 70s. That's 30 years ago. 30? Yes. That's 30 years ago. Today, how would the Japanese see us? Are there things that we've done with them that will stay in their minds and they will see us in a way that is just beyond, factors of production, just beyond your labor skills or your land skills? Because for the Japanese, they take a long time making up their minds about where to invest. But once they've invested, they're there for the long term. So how was it different promoting Singapore to the Japanese?
Yeah, but it may be 30 years, but a lot of things don't change, you see. So let me finish the story, then you will know exactly what I'm trying to say to you, David. Now, so he said that, we come to Singapore for the middle level. Exactly those PMAT skills and that PMAT employment that we're talking about, which is part service, maybe part finance, part whatever, but it's that part of it. So he says, and now I impose a worldview of Japan on Yamashita's story. And the worldview actually is that Japan is very, very successful economy and will continue actually, to perhaps dominate in the world economic scene, but it has a weakness. People look to Japan and say because of the history, their culture, their language, their tradition, they are a very cohesive society and they're internally cohesive. And this cohesiveness actually contributes towards a stability that people like to have. But however, they say that, when it comes to actually succeeding in the 21st century, where a successful operation or successful company, needs, the best possible management level people, this is Japan's weakness. And that, the cohesiveness and the internal cohesiveness of Japan is a weakness because they cannot orchestrate, a middle management level that is multiracial, that is multicultural, that is multi-religious. And both Yamashita, although he didn't tell me that specifically, now that I have read it, as an international opinion, he's actually trying to tell me that is a Japanese weakness, for the 21st century enterprise, that they cannot get good middle to upper management level people tapping, the best of breed, so to speak, the best of breed from India, from China, from Taiwan, or from wherever it is. And then, they may get all this talent, but they don't know how to integrate their culture, their tradition, their history, and all that. Does not allow them to integrate. But Singapore is slowly beginning to be able to integrate this type of talent and skills of a management type, from various pools of talent with various cultural backgrounds, various ethnic backgrounds, various language backgrounds, through our working language
an interesting
in English.
Perspective.
And that is that a lot of people think actually is going to be, the winning formula for enterprises in Asia in the 21st century.
Take a seat.